Well, I wanted to do this in 1 or 2 lectures, but I actually need a part 3 to explain how CSS is parsed. And so this lecture is about inheritance, that we touched upon briefly before, but now we're ready to really dive in. So, inheritance is a way of propagating property values from parent elements to their children. Once more, we have a very simple example here. This time we're going to determine what the line height of the child element will be. So, start by remembering from our previous lecture that each and every CSS property must have a value, even if neither we, the developer, nor the browser do specify it. In that case, there's no cascaded value, right? So, when processing a certain property for a certain element, such as the line height, the first question that the CSS engine asks is if there is a cascaded value. And if so, then of course, that's the value that's used. Now, if there's no cascaded value, then the next question is if that property can be inherited. And that depends on each property. There are some properties that are inherited and others are not. In the case of line height, that property gets inherited, as we can see from the property specification. So, if a property is inherited, then the value of that property becomes the computed value of its parent element. Now, it's very important to note that the value that gets inherited is not simply the 150%, but the computed value. In this case, that's 150% of 20 pixels, which is 30 pixels. And so the line height in the child element will also be 30 pixels, not 150% of the 25 pixel font size. Got it? So again, it's not simply the declared value that's passed, but the computed value. Now, if it's a property that's not inherited, like for example padding, then the specified value will become the initial value, which is also specific to each property. In the case of padding, that's just 0 pixels, like we actually saw in the last lecture. Again, you don't need to memorize these initial values, because they are all just rather intuitive. So, just like before, here's a quick summary of what you need to know. I guess the most important thing to know about inheritance is that it's there, and that it passes the values for some specific properties from parents to children. Again, if you just ignore the jargon, inheritance is actually pretty straightforward. Inheritance allows the developers to write less code and code that will be more maintainable. Now, in the specification for each and every CSS property, you will find if the property is automatically inherited or not. As a rule of thumb, properties related to text are inherited, so properties like font family, font size, color, etc. Other properties like margins or paddings are of course not inherited, because that would just be extremely impractical. Just imagine setting a margin on some section or something, and then suddenly all of the children would automatically get the same margin. That doesn't make any sense, right? Now, it's also important to remember that what gets inherited is the computed value of a property and not the declared value. Also, inheritance of a property of course only works if no one, neither the developer nor the browser, declares a value for that property. Okay, now something else I didn't mention yet is that we can use the inherit keyword to force inheritance of a certain property. And I will actually show you that when we get back to coding. Also, in the same way, the initial keyword can be used to reset the property to its initial value. And that's actually it about inheritance. Not hard at all, right? So let's move on now.